Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sheviit. We're up to Perek Daled Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Tzvedlana, Aranbaev, Minuchato Began Eden, Amen. Today's Mishnah is going to deal with the topic of leasing a field on Shemitah for the purpose of planting it after Shemitah. The Mishnah says, Chochrin Nirin Mina Ovdei Kochavim Bashviit. We are allowed to make agreements on Shemitah to lease plowed fields from idolaters after Shemitah, even though a person is going to cause the idolater to plow the field on Shemitah so that it will be ready the following year. Nevertheless, it is allowed because the non-Jew, this idolater, is not working on behalf of the Jew. He's working on behalf of his own self-interest so that he can demand a higher rent. Now, chochin is a form of rent known as chachirut, which basically, instead of paying a percentage of the crop each year, you pay a certain amount of the produce. The Mishnah continues, Israel, but you cannot make an agreement on Shemitah to lease a plowed field the next year from a Jew who is suspected of violating the Shemitah laws because he might illegally plow the field on Shemitah. And the Mepharshim explain that this is a sur even if the Jewish owner had enough time to plow the field in the following year, because we have to suspect that he will plow it on Shemitah. The Mishnah continues, we can give words of encouragement to idolaters who are working their own land in Eretz Yisrael on Shemitah, like for example saying be successful or be strong, because since the idolaters are not obligated to keep the laws of Shemitah, even though we cannot help them, we're allowed to encourage them while they work their fields. Israel, we cannot encourage a Jew who is doing so. On the contrary, the Mepharshim say we're obligated to rebuke a Jewish person who would do this to prevent him from violating the law. V'shoalin bishloman, and we can greet idolaters by saying shalom, which is one of the names of Hashem under pagan holidays. Mipnei darkei shalom. These acts are mutar for the sake of peace, to promote peace between Jews and non-Jews. And the Mepharshim explain that if not for the promotion of peace, it would be asur to encourage an idolater to do work that a Jew cannot do himself. Likewise, it would be asur to greet them with the name of Hashem Shalom on his holiday, because then he might commit the sin of thanking his pagan deity for having received this honor. And the Mepharshim say, however, for the sake of peace, the Chachamim allowed these practices. They based it off several psukim that we must always strive for peace between Jews and non-Jews, because the pasuk is following the ways of Hashem. The pasuk says, Tov Hashem hakol v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. Hashem is always, He's good to all. He's merciful in all His creations. And it also is written in Tanakh, the ways of the Torah are ways of pleasantness, all its paths are peace. And for this reason, the Mepharshim say we support non-Jews who are poor, we visit non-Jews who are sick, and we bury non-Jews who are in the need of a burial. That is then Rabotai Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Dal is going to discuss removing the topic of removing trees from the ground on Shemitah. Hamedel bazetim, if a person thins out his olive trees in his orchard, meaning he removes some trees, making the orchard less dense. Bet Shammai Amrim Yagom. Bet Shammai say that he can cut the trees down to the ground, but he cannot pull out the roots, because if he uproots the root, if he pulls out the roots, it gives the appearance that he's preparing the ground for planting. Bet Tiran Amrim Misharesh. Bet Tiran say he can even uproot them, because since he's only removing a few trees, he doesn't give off the appearance that he's preparing the ground for planting. But Beit Hillel agree that in the case of a person who clears his orchard, meaning he removes a relatively large number of trees that are next to each other, he cannot do so once he cuts them down to the ground. He is not allowed to uproot them. And the Mepharshim explain this process of medel, thinning out, basically is that when trees grow too close together, they don't receive enough nourishment from the ground and they don't grow as well. So what they would do is they would remove some of the trees, thinning it, medel. This would allow the remaining trees to receive the nourishment that they need to grow normally, similar to pruning, when a person removes some branches of a tree in order to let the other branches grow. So just like pruning is asur on the year of Shemitah, we spoke about this in chapter 2, Mishnah 3, so to thinning out an orchard is asur on Shemitah. Our Mishnah is permitting a person to thin out the orchard because it's referring to someone who is removing the trees, not because he wants to promote the growth of those that remain, but rather he wants to use the cut wood as firewood. So since his intent is for a permitted purpose, this activity would be allowed. Now the Mepharshim ask a very profound question on this Mishnah, that this activity should remain asur for a different reason, right? The Chachamim, we know forbids certain activities because it gives off the appearance of a wrongdoing, marit ayin. And several examples we learned in the previous chapter 3, Mishnah 5-9, is that a person cannot remove stones from his land on Shemitah, even if he wants to use them as building material. Why? Because he appears to be clearing the ground to make it ready for planting. So then why would a person be allowed to remove trees from an orchard, even for a permitted purpose, when a person appears to be doing something forbidden, thinning out the orchard, right? Removing some trees so that the remaining ones will grow better. One answer the Mefarshim give is that the Chachamim forbade the appearance of violating Shemitah only if the prohibited activity is something common, like removing stones to make the ground fit for planting. That's done by everybody who wants to cultivate their land. But thinning out an orchard is not such a common activity. Therefore, as long as a person has intent for permitted action, like using the cut wood as firewood, this would be allowed. The Mishnah continues, Ezehu amedel, what is considered thinning out? Echad o shnaim, where one person removes 1 or 2 trees growing from a group of 3 that are growing next to one another. And the Mefarshim explain, because since the clearing will be no longer than the width of 2 trees, Netanel say that even if he uproots the trees, he's not giving the appearance of preparing the ground for planting. Hamachalik, what is clearing? It is where a person removes all the 3 trees that are next to one another. Because when you remove a group of 3 trees, that clears a patch of ground that is large enough to be planted. Even Bet Hillel would say in that case that you cannot uproot the trees. Now, the Mishnah is teaching that this isur of uprooting, either thinning out or clearing according to Beit Shammai or clearing according to Bet Hillel, this doesn't apply in all situations. When does this situation apply? Mitoch shelo, where a person uproots trees from his own field. Then you're going to be suspected of clearing the ground for planting. But if a person uproots trees from the field of another person, then even if he clears the orchard, meaning he removes 3 adjacent trees, he can uproot them because no one's going to suspect him of preparing somebody else's field for planting. And the Mefarshim explained that it's going to be assumed that he is uprooting the trees of his neighbor's field because he wants firewood, and therefore you don't even have the issue of marit ayin anymore, of casting suspicion on yourself. That is in Rabotai, today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai La'olam, Amen v'Amen.